So as I said, Amor is one of the most read parshiot, that actually if you look at a scroll, that and Parshat Pinchas has the most wear and tear on those sections, because these are the sections that we read. For Parshat Pinchas, what do we read that reading for? The beginning of the month, also called Rosh. Oh, yes, exactly. I know, I was just, right. So where the Parshat Pinchas is where the Torah reading for Rosh Chodesh is found physically in the scroll, and Amor, as I said, we read often. It talks about the holidays and Shabbat and Passover and the Omer and Shavuot, which in the Torah wasn't really a time of counting so much, more of a harvest festival. Well, I mean, it was counting, but it wasn't the receiving of Mount Sinai in the Torah. That comes later. And Sukkot, and our favorite holiday that my mom says she never even knew was a holiday until she worked in the Jewish community because she got it off, Shmini Atzeret, which really has no other explanation other than it's just the end of Sukkot, plus a day. But at each of these holidays, we do something that is very special, of course, that we say Kiddush in particular ways, that every Shabbat and every holiday has its own kind of variation of it. But of course, using wine and utilizing wine in a ritual way is older than the Siddur. It is older than the Talmud. In the Talmud, it discusses many issues related to wine, how it should be mixed, who can watch over the wine, how it should be used. And we know the use of wine goes all the way back to Noah himself at the beginning of Genesis. The Torah tells us that when the flood receded and everyone disembarks from the ark, that the family returns to the land, the rainbow covenant happens, and in chapter 9, it tells us of Genesis that Noah, the tiller of soil, was the first to plant a vineyard. So it goes all the way back to the time of Noah that Jews were both farmers and also raising and growing vineyards. Oh, of course, wine is all throughout our rituals. We read a little bit about wine in ritual in today's reading, but of course wine is under the chuppah, and Friday night dinner at a bris, we use some wine. Each holiday, and highlighted, of course, by the 4 cups on Passover, which this section was very excited about earlier about Passover. Of course, Havdalah, Purim has drinking attached to it, and more and more. Borei Pri Hagafen is pervasive in Judaism. Not to say a little l'chaim with some schnapps, but just to be clear, that's not a Borei Pri Hagafen, that's a Shehakol Nihye Bedvaro bracha attached to that. But it seems that alcohol is throughout Jewish life, and alcohol has been understood as a method of celebrating and even symbolizing joy. But the rabbis also write extensively about drunkenness. Right? Maimonides, the Rambam, makes it clear that you cannot honor God while you are drunk, he says in the Mishnah Torah. Joseph Caro, one of the leading rabbis of the Shulchan Aruch, makes the distinction between being drunk on Purim, which he frowns on, and says it should be a time that you just have a little bit more than you would normally on a day. Because again, being drunk prevents you from truly praising God. There are so many examples of the dangers of becoming drunk, beginning with Noah himself and all the way through the Tanakh and beyond. But our relationship with alcohol is not new. In a 1958 Times article, they ran an article called Jews and Alcohol in 1958. The Yale professor, who I don't think is related to you guys, but Charles Snyder, see uncle, is he here today? So Yale professor Charles Snyder, the author of this 1958 study, Alcohol and the Jews, appeared in that Time magazine article, and he concludes this in 1958, that given Jewish culture, quote, compulsive eating is more likely to be selected as a means of alleviating psychic tension than addictive drinking. And I would attest to that. But all kidding aside, fast forward to today, and I know that that is not the case. That some Jews are alcoholics. And it is important that we create spaces where they can feel safe and seen and supported. This week, Rabbi Werbin, Alicia Frumkin, our education director, and I attended an important meeting convened by Federation. That, as a side note, that you should understand that the money that you give to Federation helps support initiatives like this. About 30 leaders from around the Jewish community, synagogues, JCCs, day schools came together to start to make a plan for bringing alcoholism out of the shadows and to help those in need. Marla Kaufman from the Jewish Addiction Awareness Network gave a powerful presentation of her son's struggle and the family's struggles because the Jewish community had an inadequate response or support for her family. And Marla is not alone. That I have driven people to be admitted at treatment centers, that I have accompanied people to AA meetings, I have counseled people who are in detox, and these are all Bethel families. So Marla is not alone. There is a social stigma around addiction, both alcohol addiction, drug addictions, or other addictions. It is fun to have a drink. It's social. It's expected. It's cool. It is amazing how susceptible we are to those base social pressures, no matter how old we are. So let's name it. Within this room right now, there are people who are struggling with alcohol or other addictions, or they are touched by someone that is struggling with addiction. And we cannot act as if it doesn't exist. Hiding does not help our adults. It does not help our teenagers. So let's bring AA meetings into Jewish places. Let's support Jewish families touched by this struggle. Let's bring addiction out of the shadows and make sure people know they are embraced by our community because they are part of our community. I want to close with a very small but practical idea for what you can do. For those that have been at our Shabbat, at my Shabbat table, and Rebecca is here as well, you know that we don't offer wine for Kiddush. We certainly enjoy wine, beer, scotch, but we only offer grape juice for Kiddush. And we want everyone to feel welcome at our table. It started because our next door neighbor years ago, she was pregnant, and so they had grape juice at their Kiddush, and it has stayed and become part of our tradition as well. We don't want to place the burden on the person to ask for grape juice instead of wine. We want the moment and the table and everyone gathered around to feel fully present and fully validated and fully embraced as we thank God for the blessings of freedom and Shabbat, which is exactly what the Kiddush says. So think about these small signals that you send in social settings. Are people included, or are you inadvertently excluding people who are struggling with addiction? Amor is the portion of holidays, so let's everyone celebrate together, because that embrace may be one of the most important tools in recovery. The embrace of loved ones and the embrace of community. Shabbat Shalom.